So somehow I have managed to go this entire hiking season without visiting Desolation Wilderness, and it's easily one of my favorite places to spend time. So kind of on a whim, last night I jumped online, grabbed a permit, and drove up to the trailhead after work today. So it's a little after 5 o'clock. I've got maybe an hour of sunlight left, maybe a little more. I've got an hour till sunset, so we'll see how long it hangs out after sunset. And I've got about 3.5 miles before I get to the first place I can actually camp. So I will likely be hiking a little bit in the dark tonight. Will definitely be cooking in the dark and setting up my tent in the dark. But the plan for this weekend is to go from Echo Summit to Tahoe City along the Tahoe Rim Trail. So it's another Tahoe Rim Trail section hike, and it's about 45 miles. So the first part of this hike is road walky. I mean, you're on trail, but there's a couple of road crossings, and then you walk through some cabins, this kind of resort area. There's a lot of traffic noise and people milling around. But then once you cross the dam at Echo Lakes and you get up onto this hillside, that's when you really feel like you're in it, you know. I've already been walking a mile and a half, and just right now, this feels like a backpacking trip. So I woke up on the shores of Tamarack Lake, and despite it being pitch black last night when I set up my camp, I think I did pretty good. Found a good spot, slept really well. Actually, slept a little too well. Slept a little bit longer than I would have liked. With the days being so much shorter, you know, I can expect sunset around 6:20 in the evening, and all the miles I have to cover, I was really hoping to get a much earlier start on the walk. I've got a little over 20 miles to cover today, so time to get things moving. One of the worst things about solo hiking early in the morning is there's no one to clear out all the spider webs for you. Kind of crazy how low the water level is here at Lake Aloha. I have memories of this lake just being massive, you know, little peaks of granite sticking out here and there. And now it's just these massive granite islands surrounded by kind of a little bit of water. Hopefully we get a good snow year and Lake Aloha gets refilled to its former glory. Had the strangest interaction with a southbound hiker. He was coming uphill, so I stepped off and let him pass by, and he stopped and just kind of immediately started critiquing my backpack and my kit and my clothing and my footwear, you know. And he was obviously very, very ultralight, like a 28-liter pack with hardly anything in it. It was just such a weird, what a weird personality trait to think that you can just like randomly give unsolicited advice to people because they're not doing a thing the way you would do the thing. Get over yourself. Susie Lake is one of my favorite places in Desolation. My first through hike attempt, this was where I camped by myself for the first night after my hiking partner had bailed out. This was where I set my tent down that first night alone. A gorgeous little campsite with a little like peninsula that went out right onto the water. And I remember thinking, you know, I should take a zero here. I should really just stay at Susie Lake for another day. I didn't end up doing that, and the last two times I've been out here, this time included, the mileage just didn't make sense to camp here. But one of these days, I'm going to plan a trip just expressly to camp at Susie Lake again, because I really, really love it here. It's so beautiful and so peaceful. The last time I was on this section of trail was in September of 2019, and it was just dumping snow. Just huge flakes, almost whiteout conditions. And here I am in October, and it's probably 68 degrees at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Mountains have their own plan. You never really know what they're going to throw at you. So I'm sitting near this little creek it's the outlet for Fontanellas Lake. I think that's how it's pronounced. I don't know. I'm looking at my map, and to finish the mileage I'd planned for today and for this weekend, I've got about 10 more miles to go. And if I'm being real honest, I don't think I'm going to make it. Not feeling super good about it, but I think I'm just going to walk about 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles more to the Velma Lakes, camp there, and then exit at Barker Pass tomorrow instead of pushing all the way to Tahoe City. Well, I'm all set up and ready for bed. I got some cell signal a few miles back and was able to talk to my wife for a little bit and talk about how I was feeling, about kind of my disappointment with the trip so far. And as usual, she had some valuable insight and a unique perspective. And basically what she said was, focus on what I did do this trip. Focus on what went right. Don't worry about what isn't going to happen. And I love that. I'm so lucky to have such a smart partner. She always comes through for me in those situations. So moving forward for the rest of the trip, I am only going to concern myself with what's going good, what's going right. And you know, I'll be going to bed tonight with a completely different attitude than I had the last time I spoke to y'all on camera, and I think that's pretty amazing. So this spot right here is where my 2019 through hike attempt came to an end. By the time I made it to Richardson Lake, the snow had kind of turned into a mix of like snow and rain. Big clumps of accumulated snow were falling down out of all the trees. All of the campsites here at the lake were flooded. But I found this kind of flat spot that was a little higher than everything else, and there were no big tree branches above it, so nothing was falling on my head. And I set up my tent, determined, absolutely determined, to continue walking in the morning, regardless of what the weather looked like. And hour and a half, maybe 2 hours after I'd settled in, I heard a motor, which seemed really out of place for where I was. And then I saw headlights. And two trucks had come in, two four-wheel drive trucks had come in. And it was this group of kids who were coming up. There's a cabin or a hut, whatever you want to call it, over here at the other end of the lake. And hikers can use it. I didn't know that it existed that night. Had I known that, maybe my trip would have gone differently. But they come up periodically and they stock this little cabin with non-perishable foods and drinks for the hikers, which I think is super cool. And I talked to them for a little bit, and they asked me how I was doing, and told them the truth, that I was not doing well. And they said, well, if you want to ride back into town, we're going to go stock this cabin, and we'll come back by here. And if you decide that you want to leave, we'll take you. And so I sat there with it for a while. I sat there with that offer, and went back and forth, all the pros and cons. But in the end, I decided to leave. Not necessarily just because of the weather. I think I could have muscled through the weather, but my ankle was starting to swell pretty significantly, and I just wasn't sure I could walk on it. And at the end of the day, that was the right call, because by the time I got home, the swelling had increased significantly, and I was pretty injured. So carrying on the remainder of the trip would have been a huge mistake. But it's kind of surreal to be standing right here, right now, where that trip ended. Something I've been thinking about as I'm walking along. When I first started planning this trip, which was Thursday night, super last minute, I just kind of decided I needed some time in the woods. But the original information I typed in for the permit had me leaving the trail at Barker Pass, which is ultimately what I will be doing now. But as I sat there at the computer typing in the information for my permit, this little voice inside my head was just like, hey, if you can get to Barker Pass, you can get to Tahoe City in the same amount of time. And I let my ego take over. I changed my exit point on the permit. And I think that's the lesson here. I really do. I think my initial instinct of what I could accomplish this weekend was right. And then I let my ego take over and add, I think, 18 extra miles to the trip. And that was a mistake. This is the trip I should have been on. And I gotta stop listening to that little voice, because it gets me in trouble.